Today I want to talk about one of the subjects that is close to my heart, and I think is very relevant to our times. It's something that we need to think about. I'm taking a little bit of a break from this aspect this week from talking about the Judeo-Christian ethic, and actually we're going to use practical application and actually consider this question of morality, discerning what is right from wrong, and ethics, how to apply it. So we're putting this to work. But I'm going to look at this rather than continuing on sort of a theoretical, what is Judeo-Christian morality and ethic. We're going to actually do a practical application of it from this standpoint. And what we're talking about is, when should you keep your mouth shut? Let's go to Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 23. I'm going to read this in the New Living Translation. It says, "Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble." Of course, as a commentator on the scripture might say, or maybe not. It depends. It depends. Sometimes just even keeping your mouth shut won't keep you out of trouble. I've got news for you. In this world that we live in right now, and this was one of the things that came into my inbox, Christians do remain and are one of the most persecuted religious groups in the world. Christians are experiencing imprisonment, loss of their homes and assets, rape, torture, beheadings, and other forms of murder just because they are identified somehow with Jesus Christ. In a survey done by the Open Doors World Watch List people for 2019, they're looking at some 50 countries that either range from high persecution to very high to extremely high persecution. Right now, they estimate living in countries with some form of persecution, there are something like 245 million Christians. That's, if you break it down, it's like 1 in every 9 Christians in this world are living in these countries and have some form of persecution. And they break it down, 1 in every 6 African Christians, or 1 in every 3 Asian Christians are experiencing some form of persecution. Of course, who is the top country where it's the most dangerous to be a Christian right now? Well, maintaining its position from last year and probably the year before, it's North Korea. That's hardly surprising. But they remarked that Algeria had the highest year-over-year increase in persecution of Christians, but really most of the difficulty Christians and lots of the world are facing is because of Islamic oppression. 8 out of the top 10 countries. It's all because the Islamic religion is not very nice to people who dissent from it and people who don't, conform to it. By the way, I thought it was interesting that the number 10 of the worst countries as far as to be a Christian, most difficult and persecuting, is India. And of course, that's not Muslim at all. It's Hindu. But then I suppose that's the Hindu nationalism, and Christianity upsets, as you well might imagine, for the Hindu religious system. Some of the worst areas, of course, of this world to be a Christian, Pakistan, Nigeria, the Central African Republic. You read about these things continually in the news if you're paying attention. But when we look at what we used to call the third world, or the developing nations and this sort of thing, and we see these things, most of us who are listening to this, and I'm not living in this part of the world. This seems more remote, but we have here at home in the Northern world, in Europe and in Britain, and sometimes it's very, your tongue mouth shut and you will stay out of trouble. And sometimes that seems the way it is. Or as I said, this week in the news, and elsewhere in the news, in New York State, the assembly there, with the governor signing it, they passed the Reproductive Health Act, and they actually did it on Tuesday, which a supermajority of the Democrats who were elected, they passed this, and they did it very specifically as an anniversary of the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that established the right of a woman to an abortion. And this new law that passed enshrines late-term abortion for a woman in New York State. This act, the Reproductive Health Act, removes abortion from the criminal code and instead places it in the public health code. It strips most safeguards and regulations on the procedure. Non-doctors will now be allowed to perform abortions. The reaction to this, and the governor of the state of, there's been strong reaction by the various Catholic groups, because the governor of the state of New York, a man named Cuomo, he's supposed to be Catholic. And there are a lot of Catholics who are very upset at this. And they're asking even the cardinal of the Catholic Church there in New York State to excommunicate this guy. But the cardinal himself has decided, no, he's not going to do that, following sort of like an old Catholic Church tradition where they don't want to get on the outs with political power. But he has said, he is concerned, that there are lots of healthcare workers they may have their freedom to dissent from having to do or cooperate with some of these things. It could become very more difficult for them in their lives and in their work lives. And he expresses his thought that, how long will it be before anyone who expresses a pro-life opinion is going to be prosecuted for hate speech? Now, there's also, it's also interesting this week as far as talking about, the difficulty that we may have when we speak up and if we say something. Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut and you'll stay out of trouble. Well, sometimes, as I said, or not, right now you see is very clearly there's a mark of the global rise of anti-Semitism. I guess there was some form of Holocaust remembrance this past week, or they're working on this. There were the effects from World War II, which just ended, and 7 years before I was born. There were millions and millions of people. And they've said at this point in time, talking about it, again, we here in North America aren't feeling these things, but the reporter with the National Post, a man named Shimon Koffler-Fogel, himself a Jew, obviously, he tells us that in comparison to Canadian Jews, he said, a French Jew is now 13 times more likely than a Canadian Jew to be the victim of a physical assault motivated by anti-Semitism, hatred just because you are a Jew. It doesn't matter what you say, it's just who you are. A Swedish Jew is roughly 20 times more likely than a Canadian Jew to experience a hate crime. And they pointed out that, the polling showed that in Romania and Lithuania, Eastern European countries, 1 in 4 of the respondents said they would not accept Jews as fellow citizens. 1 in 4. This is 19. What is this? This is 2019. In the UK, they said, in the United Kingdom, and here in Canada, we're obviously very closely connected with the United Kingdom. The polling has showed that nearly 4 out of 10 Jews living in the United Kingdom would seriously consider, that's close quote, that's what they asked, seriously consider leaving the country if Jeremy Corbyn, head of the Labour Party, was to come into power. Because they're very concerned, by the rhetoric of this man. Who he tries to say is just anti-Zionism, which it's all the time they're conflating it very purely, the Jews who live there, with anti-Semitism, meaning if you believe in anything that resembles being labeled Jewish, you could be persecuted. which perhaps those of you who are listening who've listened to a few more sermons, because we are the Judeo-Christian Foundation, and we believe that the Bible is based on the Word of God, and you know, three-quarters of it is the Hebrew Scriptures. The Judeo-Christian ethics based on a lot of these teachings, and in many cases, that in lots of the world, the Church of God, the Bible-believing Church of God, Christians we may be, are oftentimes just lumped in with the Jews because we share a lot with them because of the Word of God. It's that simple. Proverbs 21:23. Turn with me to Proverbs 21:23. I'm going to read it this time in the Expanded Bible version. Those who are careful about what they say, that's literally who guard their mouth and their tongue, keep themselves out of trouble. Now, in most normal situations of daily human interaction, this proverb is absolutely true. But of course, there are those times when what we believe, say, and do will get us directly thrown in front of the bus. All right, let's go here. Let's turn to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3. I'm going to read here for a little bit. Learning how to answer when we're put in difficult situations sometimes. Daniel chapter 3 and verse 1, we have this example, history of God's people, and it's important for us to know these things and keep these things in mind. King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the ruler of one of the world's first empires, there in the Middle East, of the area we now call Iraq, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. Okay, it was probably gold-plated. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the province to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. He got all the public administration of his kingdom out there. He said, "Okay, you're my guys. Okay, we've got something new we're doing here. I've got this great new idea we're going to bring in public policy." Verse 4, a herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music." Yeah, they like their music too, okay? "You fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up, but whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Well, sometimes, being careful about what you say, sometimes it can keep you out of trouble. Sometimes it's not going to work. Therefore, verse 7, when all the people, the herald said, hear the sound of the horn, flutes, all these musical instruments, people of every nation and language in my kingdom, my empire, fell down and worshiped. They did. They fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Because if you didn't, there was consequences that would make things very hot for you. Verse 8, some Chaldeans, okay, in other words, some of the people who were in the public administration, and you know how it is. When you get in some place, in any sort of large organization, there are rivalries, and I want X's job, and I want something, what he has offended me, or whatever it might be. Some Chaldeans, perhaps these were the Jeremy Corbyns of the day, took this occasion to come forward and to maliciously accuse the Jews. They said, here we have an opportunity. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. As you as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all these musical stuff must fall down and worship the golden statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." And then they come up with their punchline. Verse 12, there are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon, O king. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men have ignored you, the king. These were men who were, captives of the tribe of Judah who were brought into Babylon during the great captivities in the very late 600s, I think it's 604, BC, about, when they were hauled there. And they became civil servants to the king. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those were their Babylonian names, okay, not their Hebrew names. These men have ignored you, the king, and do not serve your gods or worship the golden statue you have set up. Now I wonder why. Judeo-Christian ethic, you have no other gods before me. It starts off the first of the 10. How do you weasel around that? Verse 13, then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, these guys came to the king first, they said, they did their whispering, and the king says, oh, he was an egotist. He was a major egotist, this guy. So the men were brought in before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the golden statue I have set up? So we'll give Nebuchadnezzar credit. He actually asked them if it was true. That's good. A lot of people, that you're judged guilty before you even have a chance to answer. But anyways, he didn't do that. Verse 15, now if you're ready and you hear the sound of, the musical instruments, the band, and you fall down and worship the statue I made, well, fine. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? See, the people who are in power, it does go to their heads in a big way. It really does. And it doesn't matter if they're the king of Babylon or if the department head of some organization. Now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar. You think about these guys in the position they're in. We don't need to give you an answer to this question. We're not going to have to dream up a careful answer and try to diplomatically. There was no dancing around it. If the God we serve exists, and they're framing it to Nebuchadnezzar, okay, in a rhetorical question, they're not expressing any doubt on their part, but they're saying to God, if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden statue you set up. Okay, this is, this was sort of like, all right, well, they decided they were in such a situation. There's no point in trying to beat around the bush. We're not going to do this because we do have to stand for what we believe in. We are people of conviction. And sometimes, if you're put right on the spot, and your enemies are outing you, sometimes, no, you're not going to, you're not going to lie if you're one of God's people. And in this case, there's no way you could say, well, let us think about, it wasn't going to happen. Benson's commentary makes this comment, says about this. In so plain a case, the situation with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before King Nebuchadnezzar, there is no room for deliberation. What's to deliberate? We have an answer ready in hand that we ought to obey God rather than man. Admirable example, this of a true faith in God and ready obedience to his will. How worthy of our imitation. It is such an instance of fortitude and magnanimity as is scarce to be paralleled. Notice, that Benson then goes on to say, you notice, however, when you look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's answer to Nebuchadnezzar, they didn't start in with a stream of insults, name-calling, or swearing against those that worship the golden image, or accusing or saying stuff of nasty things about the guys who they knew had accused them. they didn't want to, nor did they, stand out and try to make a point and gain publicity. To make, to hold, to be a victim or something. They weren't looking for trouble. But when Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were thrust onto the center stage before the king in what was a fiery trial indeed, they showed their courage. They showed the courage of their convictions and their willingness to stand up for them. And they were prepared, if need be, to suffer them. Now, in this particular case, you can read on there, Daniel, God did deliver them. And, to Nebuchadnezzar's credit, this guy who is an egotist, a total egotist, when he, God did it in such a way that he said, well, God, he set aside my command and my power. Hey, I'm not going to, who am I to argue? He restored them to their position. See, they hadn't burned their bridges by saying all sorts of nasty things. They just said, no, we're not going to do it. The God whom we serve, you can't. There was no fudge room about that. It was a plain case, and there's no room for, squirming around. This is what it is. We've had here, very interesting here in British Columbia, we've had an enormous, probably one of the largest political scandals, I think, from recent memory in Canada, here in our legislature, where we've had for a long time, the people who run the legislature seem to have been rather corrupt, or at least are being accused of all sorts of misappropriation of funds and paying things, at expenses that weren't really valid. And, the interesting thing is, even came out in today's newspaper that there were a series of whistleblowers within the civil public administration of the legislature who actually pointed out that some of this stuff was not right, and they were hauled in before the clerk and told they were going to be canned, but they could receive a severance if they signed a non-disclosure agreement and didn't publicly say anything. Again, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you'll stay out of trouble. Or in this case, you'll get paid. You'll get a payout for it. You can go do something else. Now, that's, they all accepted it, and they all signed, and they all took the money, and now they're all complaining about it, it seems, or at least a number of them are. I know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about, am I judging them? I've been in that sort of situation before, and it is very uncomfortable to be terminated and have your career, thrown in the wind from that standpoint because you're standing up for something that's right. It is painful. It is costly. And it is hard. When do you do it? When do you don't? It is a question of wisdom. What price are you prepared to pay? Let's go to in the scriptures here. Let's go into. Sometimes they call these the historical books, but you have the scriptures themselves. We call it the former prophets. You had the former and latter prophets. The former prophet. Let's go to 1 Kings, and we'll go to chapter 21. 1 Kings chapter 21, and we're going to start here with verse 1. And we're dealing at this point in time with the northern kingdom of Israel. This is after David and after Solomon. Okay, the kingdom had been divided. You were in the northern kingdom, and we were dealing during the time of Elijah and the king Ahab. Now it came to pass, by the way, who is a historical figure. Now it came to pass after these things, Naboth of Jezreel, so this is the Galilee region of Israel, this beautiful and productive agricultural valley, had a vineyard in Jezreel near the place of Ahab, king of Samaria. Okay, so you got a neighbor, in your vineyards right next to this Ahab, who's king of the land. And Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, "Give me your vineyard, so that I may have it for a garden of herbs." I want to have some vegetables. Maybe he knew in advance the new Canadian food guide. I don't know. "Because it is near my house, and I will give you a better vineyard than it, or if it seems good to you, I will give you the worth of it in silver." Kesef, the currency, the money of the day. And Naboth said to Ahab, and he responded, he said, "Far be it from me by the Lord that I should give the inheritance of my fathers to you." So Naboth is saying, well, this is my inheritance. It was given to my families when Joshua came into the land. This was divided to me. You can't take it away from me. That's not what the scriptures say. I'm standing on my rights. And he was arguing right directly what the scriptures said. A king, the kings of ancient Israel were limited. That's one of the remarkable things about the scriptures. Constitutional monarchy, they're subject to the law of God. So it was very advanced for the time. The rule of law. We're even right now, we're arguing about, should we have a rule of law? They don't have rule of law in China. We're dealing with we responded to this extradition treaty from the United States. This executive of this Chinese telecom who came in here was trading with Iran, violating U.S. laws and sneaking around. And U.S. said, "Oh, arrest her," or whatever. The Chinese say, "Hey, you arrest her, we're going to punish you guys and do all this stuff. There are going to be consequences. You do this." Well, we did it anyways because we have the rule of law in the courts. And we got people in jail, and another one's been, the guy who they say is a drug pusher or a drug smuggler, they're going to execute anyways. So Ahab came to his house after Naboth told him, "No deal, I'm not going to give you my inheritance. I don't have to." Scriptures say I don't, And Ahab came to his house heavy and displeased because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." And he lay upon his bed and turned away his face and would not eat food. Okay, he was moping in a major way. And his wife Jezebel came to him and said to him, "Why is your spirit so sad that you are not eating food?" And Jezebel was quite the character. And he said to her, "Because I spoke to Naboth of Jezreel and said to him, 'Give me your vineyard for silver, or else, if it please you, I will give you another vineyard for it.' And he answered me, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' And his wife Jezebel said to him, 'Do you now rule over Israel? Look, you're the king. You have power. Rise up and rise up and let your heart be good.'" It's another "anoint your face" or whatever it is in the old King James. But she said, hey, you're in power. Hey, everything's going to go your way. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth of Jezreel. You don't have to ask him. I'm going to give it to you. And she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal. "Oh, king, you give me your ring, and she wrote these letters and sent them to the elders and to the nobles of his city dwelling with Naboth. And she wrote in the letter saying, 'Proclaim a fast and set Naboth on high among the people, and set 2 men, sons of Belial,'" that is, sons of the devil, "'before him to bear witness against him, and saying, "You blasphemed God and the king." Then carry him out and stone him so that he may die." He was set up. They lied. And but notice Jezebel had a lot of credibility. I mean, she was, talking about, she was El Jefe. She was the drug lord of the city. She had more street cred than Guzman. Whatever his name, this guy, the Sinaloa drug cartel down in Mexico, who's currently on trial in New York too. and whatever. And the men of his city, the elders and the nobles who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent to them. And it was written in the letters that she had sent to them. They proclaimed the fast and set Naboth on high. They had the two guys, and it said, and they carried him out of the city and stoned him with stones so that he died. And it came to pass, when Jezebel heard that Naboth was stoned, was dead, she said to Ahab, Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth of Jezreel, which he refused to give you for silver, for Naboth is not alive, but dead. And it came to pass, when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab arose and went down to the vineyard of Naboth of Jezreel and took possession of it. Of course, God sent Elijah in there. Said, oh, okay. God decided, I'm going to intervene in this. And he sent his prophet to go down there and confront the king. Let's go to verse 20, 1 Kings 21 and verse 20. And Ahab said to Elijah, Have you found me, O my enemy? And he answered, I have found you because you have sold yourselves to work evil in the sight of the Lord. See, a prophet of God, he was sent there. And, it says, watch your tongue, keep your mouth shut, and you'll stay out of trouble. Well, that wasn't in Elijah's job description as a prophet of the Lord. But this may not be your or my job description in certain situations. We have to know when to pick our battles because the cost could be very high. Proverbs, if you turn with me to Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 21, it's written, Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it and indulge it will eat its fruit and bear the consequences of their words. This account here in 1 Kings 21 about Naboth's vineyard, look, you see, if you read through the account, God's prophet, there were all sorts of accountability. Ahab was going to be accountable. Jezebel was going to be accountable. Of course, so was Naboth. We see here, and let's just follow up here just a second. I want to show you something. But was it just Naboth who paid a price? He was standing on his rights. I'm not saying he wasn't standing. He was. But was it wise? Second Kings, let's go to 2 Kings, the next book. 2 Kings chapter 9 and verse 21. 2 Kings chapter 9 and verse 21. Time has passed. Ahab dies. He dies in battle as a result of a wound. And his son Joram comes into power and succeeds him. And we're breaking right in the middle, and Joram was still having battles with the Syrians, okay? And he had been wounded, and he was home recovering there in Samaria. And, while he was there, lookout said, there's somebody coming. And he thought it was news of this battle that was going on, that he was getting news of this battle. So he heard this, and from the guard that there was somebody driving up in their chariot, group and followed by horses, group of guys. Harness Joram, because they were driving chariots. And in those days, if you know the way they did it, they had the chariots there. They'd bring in the horses, put them there. They had the harnesses up, and they dropped the harnesses and attach them. So you could do it really quickly. This was the advanced military technology of the day. Harness Joram, shouted, and they harnessed his chariot. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, who was a relative of his, a cousin, who was up visiting him. I guess they were having a good time while he was recovering. So he'd come up to visit him, get well visit. Each in his own chariot, and met Jehu was the commander of Joram's army up fighting the Syrians at a plot of land of Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember, because it was just outside the city wall. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, Do you come in peace, Jehu? And Jehu answered, What peace can there be as long as there is so much prostitution and witchcraft from your mother Jezebel? Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, or you will stay out of you'll stay out of trouble. Or do the opposite and get right in it. But see, Jehu was ready for action. When Joram saw Jehu and he heard this, Joram turned around and fled, shouting to Ahaziah, "It's treachery, Ahaziah." Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders, and the arrow went through his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot, so he killed the king. And Jehu said to Bidkar, his aide, "Pick him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember when you and I were riding side by side behind his father Ahab. And the Lord uttered this oracle against him," by Elijah the prophet. "As surely as I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons yesterday," this is the Lord's declaration, "so I will repay you on this plot of land." And this is the Lord's declaration. Now, according to the word of the Lord, throw the body of Joram on this place. See, when Naboth turned Ahab down, and he was standing on his rights, it cost Naboth, of course, his life, because Jezebel was quite willing to exercise naked, raw power. She didn't believe in the rule of law. It was not the sort of person she was. And it wasn't just Naboth who died, but it was obviously, from what it says right here, his sons too. The cost. Naboth was scripturally standing on his right to his God-given land inheritance, but the cost to himself and his family was enormous. See, there's a scripture in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 3. Proverbs 13 and verse 3, Amplified Bible version. "The one who guards his mouth," that is, thinking before he speaks, "protects his life." The one who guards his mouth, because he's thinking before he speaks, protects his life. The one who opens his mouth, his lips wide, blurts something out, sometimes comes to ruin. Proverbs 28:29. Proverbs 28:29. The expanded Bible version. "When the wicked get control," okay, when the wicked are in power, when they rise up and seize power, when the wicked get control, everybody hides. But when they are destroyed, righteous people, good people, do well. In normal times, when the wicked are not in control, okay, then you could stand on your rights. If Naboth had been dealing with David or even Solomon or even Solomon's son Rehoboam, probably nothing would have happened. But Ahab and Jezebel weren't like that. They weren't. You have to know who you're dealing with. We have to know our times that we're dealing with. You have to exercise wisdom. Who is it you're dealing with? Can you get a fair shake or not? If you're dealing with the head of the Sinaloa drug cartel, okay, so what do you want? I can move someplace else. There's no way I'm going to try to, there might be, if you want my taco stand, it's yours. Sometimes you have to think before you speak. Who are you dealing with? When the wicked get control, everybody hides. And yet we're, here in North America, for the most part, we're still living in normal times. For the most part, I said. When the wicked are not yet fully in control. Places they are, though. And when we're dealing with what is maybe a normal situation in our daily lives, then Proverbs 21:23 should be our guiding light, and I'm going to cite it in the New Century Version. Those who are careful about what they say keep themselves out of trouble. And in normal times, that is good advice, what the scriptures have to say. Those who are careful about what they say keep themselves out of trouble. And in most of these situations, what are they? What are they, the things when we think about that? When should we keep our mouths shut? Let's go to Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 7. One of the times we should keep our mouth shut is when we're in the heat of anger. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 17. I'll read this in the Holman Christian Standard Bible. A quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man who schemes is hated. Another proverb just is talking about scheming here, this idea. Proverbs 12:2. Good man obtains favor from the Lord, but he condemns a man who schemes. See, God doesn't like people who are plotting, who are planning. But the point in Proverbs 14:17, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. Somebody comes up to you in a bar, wants to pick a fight. You don't have to respond to that. Sometimes people do want to pick fights, one way or another. Women pick fights too. Among them, it's all these things you have to know when. We don't, is a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. We don't, we should not act. We shouldn't, we should shut our mouths. We're in the heat of anger. Proverbs 14, verse 29. Okay, just a little bit later after, sometimes, the way the Proverbs works, it'll make a statement, and then it'll go back and add a little more to it. So just in this case from Proverbs 14:17, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. Proverbs 14:29 says, whoever is slow to anger, or as the Greek ancient translation of the Septuagint put it, long-suffering. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding. But he who has a hasty temper, that is, you're impulsive, exalts folly. We need to be slow to anger, because if we're not, we can act foolishly. We can do something we will regret later. We'll regret the words we say. In our society right now, we seem to love, on social media and stuff, the quick repartee, what we used to call a quick response. You insult me, I will insult you, and I'll see if I can insult you better. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper or is impulsive exalts folly. But long-suffering bears much, is long, very patient. Sometimes it doesn't seem very glorious or whatever. It's certainly not appreciated in our society, people who are slow to draw when it comes to the words. One of the problems we have, as I said, in social media, Twitter and whatever, this stuff goes around the world. Spreads, becomes a great big deal because of that. Well, even you had this case, right, where they talking about how things get out of hand and control because social media is so fast. There was this Saudi Arabian woman, 18, young woman, and she wasn't getting along with her family at all. They wanted her to marry somebody she didn't want her. They were controlling her. This is Muslim Arab mentality, conservative mentality. Our daughters are our property. They are. They're not allowed this or that or the other thing. They are property in Saudi Arabia. The current Crown Prince is loosening that up a little bit, but he's an interesting character all of his own. Anyways, the idea is, of course, to be long-suffering means sometimes being slow on the draw. But as I was saying, in this case with this girl, she fled, she escaped, and she was running from home and wanted to take up refuge. I think it was in Australia. Canada, we took her eventually. But, when the first planes that she had got out, our family were on vacation in Kuwait, just north of Saudi Arabia. She got a plane after her the last flight out for the day. She timed it to go to Thailand, and she was then going to change planes and go someplace else, but her family were there, and they got the Saudi embassy in Thailand, in Bangkok to have her passport seized, and they threw her into a hotel, and then they were going to come and get her and drag her back to Saudi Arabia. But as her father later remarked, said, he's thinking, those idiots in Thailand, they took her passport when they should have taken her cell phone, or they should have taken her smartphone, because she got on, the internet, and pretty soon it's all over the world. In her case, it saved her life, probably. In her case, but in many cases these days, quick-tempered man acts foolishly, or as opposed to whoever is slow in anger has great understanding. These days things can break out, and they can be all over the place. And you have these, the Twitter fests that oftentimes go on, especially in politics. So when else should you keep your mouth shut? Well, how about when you don't have all the facts? When you don't have all the facts. Let's go to Proverbs. In the book of Proverbs, we'll read a few more Proverbs here. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 17. And it says, the one who is first in his own cause, okay, somebody comes to somebody and is going to complain about X, Y, Z, the boss, is somebody else in the company or whatever it might else be at school. The first in his own cause seems just because of the way they color it. They say all these things. Oh, he said this, she did this, or whatever it might be. But his neighbor comes and searches him out. In other words, brings up the other facts in the witness, and makes it, you discover all of a sudden that the first person was coloring her a line. See, you keep your mouth shut when you don't have all the facts. You don't rush to judgment, is what this means. That's true with a parent. You gotta have one come in and, so-and-so's doing this or that, well, wait and get to all the facts. I don't know if you're an employer or somebody else or a supervisor, before you don't be fast on the draw. Don't rush to judgment. Get all the facts. But I know a lot of people, they don't. They really don't. When else do you keep your mouth shut? Obviously, when you haven't verified the story. See, it goes along the same thing. And there, the scriptures go to Deuteronomy 17:6, okay, where the scripture says that you have to establish things. You have to have a witness before you can take any sort of legal action. You have to be 2 or 3 witnesses to establish a fact. Just one person coming and saying something, making accusations isn't enough. Even in courts today, somebody can make an accusation, and there are lots of people who make accusations, but there ought to be corroboration. Now, that's not always true these days, which is pathetic, especially with some of these things that go back 30 years, and somebody is now making a complaint after something happened 30 or 40 years ago, and they're saying this. Well, where are the facts? Where's the proof? Where's the evidence? Scriptural standards, Judeo-Christian ethic, was that you have to establish it in the mouth of 2 or 3 reliable witnesses. You see, it can't be like, Jezebel setting up these sons of Belial, the sons of the devil, who are liars. I'm sure they knew exactly who they could get to do this job for, a little bit. But, if you're a responsible person, you don't believe those sorts of people. There are all sorts of people who lie. Save their own hide. Of course, we have the special prosecutors who haul in people, and if they got some goods on them, they can. This is still going on. There's nothing new about any of this. Another time you might keep your mouth shut is even if you're on a right principle, but the words you might say something, you're going to offend somebody else, a weaker brother. And this is the way the scriptures put it. And the principle is enunciated and explained in 1 Corinthians 8:11, where the whole idea of, well, okay, at that time, in that society, if you were living in Corinth, which was a Gentile Greek area, all of your meat, they didn't have supermarkets like we did in those days. They would slaughter the cows and then sell the meat, the butchers would, but they would be slaughtered and then it'd be dedicated to Zeus or one of the Greek gods. And did that contaminate the meat? Paul said, so what? These false gods are false gods. They're idiotic. You want to eat beef tonight? Get a good fresh piece of meat. But there were some people coming new in the church who had been idolaters and had whatever, and they did it with conscience that, if they did this, they were actually acknowledging or worshiping this old god of theirs, and it was going to bother them conscience. He says, you don't eat the meat if it's going to bother somebody else. You don't say something sometimes, and standing the principle, even if you're correct, if you're going to sometimes, by saying that, it's going to bother somebody else because of their background. That's why in the church, in many cases, especially when you have congregations where maybe you have a few people, we used to do this anyways, that you had somebody who was an alcoholic, a church, a church party or something like this, they'd be dry. Because to have alcohol was to put a stumbling block in front of somebody. And then sometimes that's with our words too. Maybe a correct principle, but maybe now's not the time to say it. Because of their weak conscience or their sensibility of that. That's some of those times it's just better because of the benefit for some other person's benefit, not to say it. Now also we should keep our mouths shut sometimes when our words will reflect poorly on the Lord or on our family or on our friends. We should think about that. Let's go to 1 Peter in the general epistles here, the first of the Apostle Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21. For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering. Okay, that's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were called to, say, no, we're not going to worship idols. So they had to stand up. And they had to be willing to even die for it, if that was the case. God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his footsteps. This is the principle of imitating Christ, which is one of the, oldest, most cherished principles of what it means to be a true Christian is following in Christ's footsteps. Verse 22, he never sinned, nor ever deceived anyone. In other words, he didn't say stuff to deceive people. He did not retaliate when he was insulted. That's an interesting thought. Nor threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. An interesting example. We have to, we should shut our mouths if our words are going to be a poor reflection on the Lord, or our family, or our friends sometimes. It's a number of those things. Thinking of Christ's example, what would he have done? Another time when it might be very good to shut your mouth and not make a comment is when you might be ashamed of your words later. If you go to Proverbs 8:8, it's interesting. Everything I say is honest. Nothing I say is crooked, that is twisted, or false, or perverse. So when we think about, what are the purposes of our words? What are we saying? Are the words, we're saying things that we wouldn't want to really hear them repeated to us a few times later on in a recording or something. Another times when we should just keep our mouths shut is when our words might convey a wrong impression. Let's go to Proverbs 17:27. He who has knowledge, okay, we have knowledge of the Word of God. He who has knowledge restrains and is careful with his words. How much do you say? How much can they receive? How much can they bear? He who has knowledge restrains and is careful with his words. And a man of understanding and wisdom has a cool spirit. That means they're in control. They're a cool hand Luke. And even temper. Another time to keep your mouth shut in a situation is when you're tempted to lie. Tempted to lie. You know, oftentimes, I know that, in school these days, a teacher asks a child, you have to frame your questions right, because the instant response in most cases will be a denial that is a lie. I mean, people don't even think twice about it these days. But we as Christians, we should keep our mouth shut when we're tempted to lie because we're on the spot maybe. Proverbs 4:24, Amplified Bible Version, put away from you a deceitful, that is a lying or a misleading mouth, and put devious lips far from you. Sometimes maybe it's better to, they have the standard reply, no comment. No comment. Better say that. Keep our mouth shut when we're tempted to lie. And another good time, the last of these principles, is when it is time to listen. That's a good time to keep your mouth shut. Sometimes it's a time to listen. In Proverbs 13:1, in the context of a family, it's here, a wise son heeds and accepts, and is the result of his father's discipline and instruction. But a scoffer does not listen to reprimand and does not learn from his errors. We have to understand sometimes that people, there is time to shut up and just listen. See, what can we learn from this, what we're hearing? Is it a time to listen and just not have a comment? Let's go to James chapter 3 and verse 2. This is the classic on this. Of course, written to the church. Apostle James said this, and I can endorse this fully. For we all stumble and sin in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, that is, never saying a wrong thing, he is a perfect man or a perfect woman. If we never stumble or make a mistake with what we say, we're perfect. Fully developed in character, without serious flaws, able to bridle his whole body and to rein in his entire nature, taming his human faults and weaknesses. It's interesting. Just by thinking carefully about what we say, not stumbling in the things we say, reflecting, thinking before we speak. And that is, if we can do that, we have achieved, we've actually becoming mature, developed in character without serious flaws and weaknesses. Our words make a good deal, mean a good deal. There are times, of course, to keep our mouths shut, and there are times to speak. We have both those opportunities. It is wisdom and reflecting on what we learn from the Judeo-Christian ethic and the morals and ethics, learning to distinguish between right and wrong, what is wisdom or what is foolishness. And we grow, but it is so important. The subject of what we say, should we keep our mouth shut, or should we say? Should we speak up? It's very important. Jesus thinks it's important. Let's go, and we'll close with this. in Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12 and in verse 36. I'm going to read this in the Amplified Bible version. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 36. But I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will have to give an accounting for every careless or useless word they speak. Far more serious than just accounting for the expenses and justifying them, like the problem we have in our legislature right now. On the day of judgment, people will have to give an accounting for every careless or useless word they speak. For by your words, and what we say reflects our spiritual condition, for by your words you will be justified and acquitted of the guilt of sin, and by your words, if our words, what we say, are not in accordance with the light of the Scriptures, and by your words you will be condemned and sentenced. Because of what we speak, of course, comes right out of our, comes from our hearts. So let's think carefully, about this. To guard, to watch over what we say, to weigh carefully our words before we actually speak them, so that we can, as appropriately, respond in the situation and the times we live in. Because it's getting more serious and more dangerous all the time at this point in time. Let us reflect on these things. Let's pray.